is preparing the live stream.
Well, I'll go mute meanwhile.
So now we are on YouTube. Of course, for the moment, we just see a dark screen with our names once we speak because it's not broadcast yet.
I see it. Yeah, okay.
Cool. Yes. This is the
I hope Else manages to come in.
I am not speaking. This is the YouTube record that I have open. Let me close it, otherwise.
So do you need to let the participants in, or would they?
At the moment, we are still in testing modes.
Mm-hmm.
I was waiting for Else before.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, before go live. But once we go live, I don't need to like open the door to attend this. They are already inside.
Hi, my dear, are you there?
What I need to check is if I have the audio off here. Yeah, good.
I think we should let the people in a minute before, no?
Okay, so I start the live stream. We are live.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I can see the participants are joining us and even waving. We have some participants who are waving. Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Good evening.
If you notice, it's the forum badge in the background.
Aha, yep.
We have
It's a coincidence. It's not planned.
Okay, we'll wait one more minute to give time for everyone to join. Okay. We have still some people joining us. In the meantime, we did mention the forum badge last year's. We have this year's forum coming up in September. It will be a virtual forum this year, for reasons I think that we all know. Keep the 19th and 20th reserved of September. We will talk more. We will mention the forum towards the end, where we'll give you also the website that you can visit and have a look at the program that we are preparing for this event. Okay, so let's start. Welcome everyone to Women's Brain Project second webinar, where we will be focusing on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on families and mothers. It is great to have participants from all over the world, and I hope you are coping well during this time. And once again, thank you for joining us. My name is Annemarie Schumacher. I'm a health psychologist leading a palliative care program at the University of Lucerne in Switzerland, and I am co-founder and president of Women's Brain Project. Before saying more about Women's Brain Project, or WBP as we say, and today's topic, I would like to start with some housekeeping information. Due to the number of people attending, all microphones are switched off to avoid background noise during the presentation. You will have time to interact with our speakers during the Q&A session. We will be reading questions submitted before the webinar, as well as questions that you can submit anytime during the webinar. Please make sure you submit your questions in the Q&A box, which is right next to the chat box. So please do not mistake the Q&A box with the chat box. So the Q&A box has two chat bubbles and Q&A written on it. We will be reading the questions out from there. We also have 3 polls planned for this evening, and these will appear in pop-up windows during the webinar. The session is being live streamed, and the recording can be watched anytime after this evening on YouTube. It is now a great pleasure for me to start this webinar by briefly introducing Women's Brain Project. WBP is an international nonprofit organization founded in 2016, advocating for and carrying out research on sex and gender differences in brain and mental health. We propose a new personalized way to develop and perform medical treatments, caregiving and prevention strategies, together with development of novel technologies based on consideration of sex and gender differences. WBP works on addressing these themes by focusing on 4 pillars. We try to understand the impact of sex and gender differences in basic science. We also focus on clinical sciences in a second pillar, So how these differences impact clinical development, such as the design of clinical trials. In the third pillar, we focus on socioeconomic risk factors that affect our brain and mental health, such as education and income. Gender differences also play an important role here. And last but not least is our fourth pillar, novel technologies, where we study the impact of sex and gender bias in the development of technology and AI. Behind WBP is an extraordinary team of experts from various disciplines, including medical doctors, neuroscientists, psychologists, communication and technology experts, lawyers, as well as caregivers and patients, most of whom give their time pro bono for the organization. You can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and also read more about our work on our website, womensbrainproject.com. So let's move on to today's topic. As you probably all have experienced, COVID-19 has totally changed our normal routine, both at work as well as at home, in all areas of our life, really. With this webinar, we will talk about the impact of this pandemic on the family. All family members, young and old, are affected by the situation. There is much to talk about when considering the family's experience at this time, and this evening is just the tip of the iceberg. I would also like to mention that our next webinar this Wednesday will be focusing in more detail on the effect of this pandemic on children. This evening, we will start with an input by Ruth Formosa Ventura on how families respond to change and what factors affect this response. We will then focus on two topics. Francesca Baracchi will talk about the experience and challenges of becoming a mother during the pandemic. We will also look at challenges faced by working mothers while supporting children with homeschooling. What help is needed in such situations? How do we address the effects of isolation and lack of peer interaction in children? What do we know about risks relating to the reopening of schools? Else Sandset will talk about Norway's approach in this pandemic with regard to working from home and to schooling at home. I would now like to start with the first poll, which Francesca will show us on screen. And we would like to know, how has COVID-19 affected your family life? We have two questions here. You can choose more than one answer per question. So take a few moments to go through the two questions and the options, the answers. Pick the answers that you can relate to. And in a few moments, Francesca will then show us the result.
I'm just giving more people to vote. We are getting the first votes. Here we go. So polls are closed. I'm sharing the results.
Okay, thank you for your answers. So in the first question, we see that the majority of people have taken family grandparents, the relationship between family and grandparents, which is quite limited at the moment when it comes to meeting and interacting with grandparents. And other two higher answers here are the couple unit, as well as mother-son-daughter relationship, and just a little bit further down in the percentage scale is the father-son-daughter relationship. When it comes to the second question, so what affected you most? We see that there are two answers that are, or three, that are most popular here. No interactions with extended families, social interaction, loss of freedom to go out, and the general feeling of insecurity. I think these are all topics that we will be mentioning today. So thank you, Francesca. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ruth Formosa Ventura. She's a systemic psychotherapist working with couples and families. and is also a member of Women's Brain Project's Executive Committee. Ruth has over 15 years of clinical experience with couples and families and will be talking about families' experiences of change during the pandemic.
Thank you, Annemarie. So, what is the process set in motion when a family system is faced with forced, unpredicted change, such as the pandemic? It all starts with awareness. The family system starts picking signs from out there that something is changing. The family starts attending to it as a very serious matter, but doesn't want to accept it. It's seen as something far away for the time being. So goes through a phase of shock and disbelief. Here, it's accompanied by anger, because they see that they are going to be deprived from basic grounded structures such as work, school, and social activities. Some also try to develop conspiracy theories around what is happening, craving for understanding. In general, people crave for understanding because it gives them a sense of control, especially when anxiety and uncertainty are bound to follow. Slowly, the system starts accepting the need to respond to its surrounding stimuli, acquiring a predisposition to take up the new cues, move from a position of antagonism to working with the surroundings. Slowly, a sense of meaning, start emerging. The new belief is, we have a purpose here. It's all for our protection. We have to preserve our system as well as the environment and also other families. So, like social conscious developing. Can I have slide 2, please? This loss of life, as we know it, is making space for something new. There is more focus on relying on internal resources, so the social exchanges are being replaced by pronounced family intra-relational exchanges. There is a consideration for additional stresses. To name a few, which are pertinent to the situation, are additional expenses, for example, setting IT systems at home in place, perhaps considering limited medical insurance coverage for therapies and treatments, and also the loss of reduction in income. Other additional parental roles, such as mother doing more of the looking after, not having any psychological or physical space in the house. Fathers having to give more input at home. Working mothers and fathers have to shift their work-family life balance. Children, they're missing out on friends, family activities, extended family visits, sport activities, and possibly also some therapies. Additional concerns regarding to looking after the elderly, as well as those related to any worrying family function and mental health issues existing pre-pandemic. So in the meantime, all this happening, this awareness makes it possible for the family to acquire new ways of behaving, new resources. For example, fathers are learning what it means to be at home with the children, discovering an interest and a motivation in being more active. Mothers are feeling less stressed, not being tied by a schedule, enjoying more the children, and also exploring other venues of letting off steam. Children learning through the comfort of their rooms, communicating to peers and grandparents online. Some were able to shift their sports, if possible, to remote setups. Reading, baking, walking, these are all activities that are becoming more in the foreground. Extended family members, like grandparents, have to manage IT. So during this whole process, parents are being flexible. They're having conversations so that they allow for some ways of relating with each other, with their surroundings. They allow concessions at home. They make mistakes and allow mistakes. This is very important because when you allow space for mistakes, there's less tendency to blame each other for something that's not working. And they keep the conversation going because it's important that they gauge how they are contributing to change and where this change is taking them. And also it's important to kind of continue picking up cues internally and externally to maintain its course. Once the system comes to a good sense of where they acquired new skills, new working, new dynamics, they hold on to the newness. Families tend to like staying stable. So I've heard families saying, no, I'm not sure I'd like it to change. I wonder how it's going to be when everything goes back to normal. Well, if there is a normal now, and I hope not entirely to the way it was. So now I would like to give us some attention on a particular context, which is the two-parent family earners. This is slide 3. Two-parent family earners with preschool children as well as young school-age children are becoming a challenging scenarios, especially for mothers. Who ought to have more time to work and less time to do the looking after the kids or the family? Who is earning more, have a good reason for looking after less? Reality is showing that when the partners not share equal shared responsibilities at home and parenting roles are set in relation to gender expectations, these families are suffering more, especially the mother. So the language is he helps and I do it for her. So the responsibility lies on the mother, and anything coming from the father is like an extra bonus. On the other hand, when couples have defined division of labor and the language used is we have shared responsibility, the system adapted a bit easier to the challenge because the belief still holds during the pandemic, and they were more willing to add on daily tasks as compared to the pre-pandemic. Okay, so now I would like to give the floor, our attention to Dr. Francesca Baracchi, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in maternal mental health and works in Switzerland.
Good evening or good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ruth. I'm gonna dive in immediately. As Annemarie already stated in the introduction, the COVID pandemic has massively affected our lives. If we think about families that are expecting at the moment or have just welcomed a baby into this world, this situation of the COVID completely changed what it was a very unique and special time that is usually filled with expectation, anticipation, family time, plans, with a completely different narrative that instead is characterized by uncertainty, isolation, unpredictability, anxiety, a sense of loss of control, and of course, a sense of grief for the experience that this family have long imagined and long dream about, and that they currently cannot have. Next one. Thank you. When we consider the pregnancy, the birth, and the postpartum period, the concerns that women are reporting are different and kind of specific to each one of these three situations. During pregnancy, women are very concerned about the possibility of getting sick and the consequences that these infections can have on their baby. And of course, are also concerned about losing someone they love, for example, a partner or the grandparents of the baby. They also suffer for the different level of care that right now has very limited checkups. The checkups are definitely kept at minimum. And the fact that, for example, the partner are usually not allowed to face-to-face appointments. This is already a stressful situation in physiological pregnancies, but think about a woman, for example, with a high-risk pregnancy, or someone who suffers several miscarriages before this current pregnancy, or a woman that has gone through IVF and has been waiting for this particular moment for years, for example. There is also a general sense of confusion in pregnant women. Pregnant women, they don't even know if there are a high-risk group or non-high-risk group. They complain that information is scarce, and sometimes there are inconsistent policies even within the same town between hospitals. And so these add to the confusion and to the uncertainty. When we come to birth, which is an event that is often associated with a high level of anxiety, also in normal circumstances, women do not really know what to expect right now. And they are afraid of having to birth alone without a partner. A lot of hospitals allow partners only during active labor, meaning that women can be alone for a long time before the partner is allowed in. A lot of hospitals do not allow partners in operating rooms, meaning the C-section are carried with women completely by themselves. And there is also a higher level of anxiety about possible complication. For example, what if my baby needs to go to the neonatal ICU? Will I be able to visit him or her? Will my partner will be able to come? Will I be able to hold her? Or what if I need to stay in the hospital for longer than expected without any visitors that can come and help me out? There is also a concern about a possible increase in medicalized deliveries. These come more from the health professionals, meaning an increase in planned C-section and induction, partially due to the hospital trying to pressure mothers in order to have the maternity ward under control, but also coming from mothers that can feel a little bit more a sense of control, knowing a date for their delivery. As far as postpartum goes, the first complaint is definitely the lack of face-to-face support. And in Switzerland, for example, postpartum home visit from midwives have been shifted to Zoom meetings, except the first one. And in this time, in the postpartum time, face-to-face supports is definitely crucial. If we think about trying to start breastfeeding, the support of a lactation consultant at home or being able to go and see her in the office, it's something that at the moment is definitely not possible. Families, and in particular mothers which are isolated, are also lacking practical help and family time. And we know that one of the main advice that we always give to new mom is find your village, find your tribe. But how is it possible to do it now where social distancing is mandatory? So the sense of isolation that often comes when we become mothers is even more poignant at this moment. Next slide, please. So when we look at the situation right now, just in normal circumstances, 1 in 5 women experience a maternal mental health disorder during pregnancy or within the first year of postpartum. In the COVID pandemic, we know that all the risk factors are basically increased. Plus, there's a reduction in maternal healthcare support. Of these 5 women, 1 in 5 women that experience these disorders, only 15% can actually reach a treatment and get treatment in normal circumstances. So you can just imagine what it means right now for with an increase probably of these maternal mental health disorders and no access to care. So what are the repercussions on maternal and infant physical and mental health of COVID-19? It's something that at the moment we don't know, but it's certainly concerning. So we're gonna have another poll now. So I'm gonna leave it to Annemarie.
Thank you, Francesca. Yes, we would like to hear from you again. And this time our question is, what measures would help you the most, or what measures would you think are most helpful at this time? Once again, you can click more than one answer. So take some time to go through our multiple choice answers and click the ones that are relevant for you.
I'm just giving some more times to people to reply. Here we go, we're almost there. So I will close the polling now.
Okay, thank you. We have another Francesca in the background who is taking care of our polls. Thank you, Francesca. So we will be able to see the results in a moment. And wow, so there is a very clear winner here, if we can call it that, and that's shared responsibilities at home would be most helpful. Followed by opening of childcare and or schools. That's also very interesting, and that's the topic of our webinar on Wednesday, this Wednesday. And next is clear directives on how to behave on COVID-19 pandemic phase 2. That's very interesting. Thank you, Francesca. We can close the results. And I would like to introduce our third speaker for this evening, Else Sandset. Else is a Norwegian stroke neurologist. So she works at the Department of Neurology in Oslo. She's also a full-time working mother, married to a full-time working father. So we are looking forward to hearing Else's perspective about this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Annemarie. I think we can go on to the next slide, please. So first, I would like to talk a bit about the experiences of working from home, being a doctor in the hospital at the time of pressure, and having children at home. I think this has been one of the most challenging periods of my life, trying to juggle all of this at the same time. However, I've also found it to be quite rewarding the days I've been at home, having my son at home. Even though it's been challenging, I've gotten to know him in a different way, and I have to say I have appreciation for that. We can go on to the next slide. It's been it's another challenge during the past couple of months have been to navigate what is going on in the news, and how are we going to take in the information that we are presented. I consider myself fairly knowledgeable when it comes to reading scientific data. Still, it's been nearly impossible to navigate the current situation. And when reading the newspaper, for example, a recent article, "Kids aren't coronavirus guinea pigs, Danish mums rebel as schools reopen." And then the next day you read an article about how having school closed impacts children and so on. So I think one of the most useful pieces of information I read was quite early on in this during the pandemic, in the end of February. And it was a comment in the Lancet about how to fight an infodemic. Because there is so many news at the moment, they're all sensational, and it's very difficult to understand what is the truth and what is not. And also, I think most of us, we don't really know. We will know in a year's time what the answer to this question is. On to the next slide, please. There are, however, some evidence, and thankfully the Norwegian Institute of Public Health have put together a report, a rapid review. This was published on April 30th, so it's now there's already a lot more evidence out there. But this review investigated the role of children in transmission of COVID-19. And the first question, one of the questions that were asked was, can children transmit the virus? And if so, to whom? And when reviewing the evidence, their conclusion was that the current evidence suggests that children can transmit the virus, but there is no evidence that children are key drivers of transmission. However, again, evidence is sparse, and it is too early to conclude firmly about the role children play in the transmission of COVID-19. The second very important question there is, what are the measurable effects of school closures? Also here, they have gone through the evidence that was up until then late April. And we have not identified directly applicable data, but limited evidence based on experiences from the SARS outbreak in Beijing in 2003 suggests that the school closure had limited impact on transmission control. I think what we do know is, for example, in Norway and Denmark, about 5% of the COVID-19 cases have been children underneath the age of 20. We also know that most children get mild or moderate disease. So personally, I'm not too worried if my son would get COVID-19. Next slide, please. What then has Norway done, and how has Norway been different than, for example, Italy or Switzerland? So there was a lot of, we had a rapidly increasing number of cases, and we had a high number of cases according to our quite small population of 5 million people towards the end of mid-March. On March 12th, our government decided to shut down our society to some extent, far less than many other countries. Shops were still opened. We were allowed to walk outside, but and we were urged to utilize nature and explore the the fjords and the mountains that we have in Norway. Easter came, Easter went, and after Easter on April 20th, it was decided to open the kindergartens, and the first 4 years of school opened shortly, just a week after. This was with quite strong measures on the number of children allowed to be in the same room at the same time. And it has also been proven that the measures that were taken at the time have caused or have worked in the extent that if a kindergarten teacher or a child has gotten sick, they haven't needed to close the whole kindergarten, but they could just take out the one group. So our society is now slowly opening more and more. Hairdressers and so on have also opened at the moment, and we are experiencing and getting accustomed to the new normal. So I think we can move on to questions.
Thank you, Else. Yes, so now it's time for your questions and answers. And while our questions are coming in, I would like to start with one for all of our speakers. And it's about, what did we learn from this lockdown? So what are your recommendations?
I can start if...
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I think for the lockdown, for me personally, and for a lot of the people I'm surrounded with and my colleagues, I think it has really made us reflect a bit on the life that we normally live, which is quite high-paced, and a lot of us do quite a lot of traveling and so on. So for me, I think the most important aspect of the lockdown has actually been to reflect a bit on how my normal life was, and changes that me and my family might want to take after the lockdown, or after this has passed over.
Thank you, Else.
Can I go?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
About families expecting or who just had a baby. I know it's a very difficult time, very stressful. As I said in the beginning, it's nothing of what these families have imagined this time would be for them. So it's important in this time to kind of try, as Ruth said, to adapt to the new situation and stop grieving and stop, thinking about what you lost, and instead focus on the positive and try to see instead if you gained something from this situation. For example, you might have your partner that is at home with you after birth, and it doesn't have to go back to work after 3 days. This is a special family time that you wouldn't have had if it wasn't for this particular situation. I was talking to a mom who just recently had twins, and she said, I'm feeling so guilty about saying this, but this is a blessing for me, because having my husband home, I have a 5-year-old and 2 newborn twins. I couldn't have coped all by myself. So there are some positives. Sometimes it's also positive things that you are not allowing people coming visiting during the first few days when you're home. This gives the family time to get to know, the new member, to get adapt to a new rhythm without people intruding, coming with unsolicited advice that we know that at this time they're, coming from all over the place. And so try to focus also on not focus too much on what you lost, but try to focus a little bit on what this pandemic gave you. And one thing that I want to say is, I know it's not the same thing, but it's possible to connect. There are fabulous group, for example, on Facebook, they're called Bumps on Lockdown, or babies on lockdown. These are all family from all over the world that have been affected the same way that your family might have been affected. And it's so good for you to see that there are positive stories, that births have been successful, moms or babies are healthy. Even mom that had COVID, they had a positive experience at the hospital. So get your information and try to connect and create a different kind of village, you know, not the village again that you expected, but the village that you can have at this time with the means that you have. And the last one, ask for help. Help cannot come into the home, but people can cook you meals and leave them, you know, in front of your door. You can leave a basket of laundry outside your door. People can come pick it up and bring it back clean and folded. If you have a dog, people can walk your dog. So, you know, when you come home with the baby, or if you're in bed rest, for example, during the pregnancy, I'm sure that there are people out there that want to help. And it's safe to do it even by keeping, you know, the social distancing at this time.
Thank you, Francesca.
Yeah, you stole one of mine, Francesca.
Sorry.
You know, ask, no, it's okay. Ask for help, because sometimes we are so caught up in our anxiety and losses, and we forget to, you know, to remember that we are connected. And even by talking to friends, you know, we've seen a lot of videos, a lot of memes going around, you know, because it helps us, it supports us. But even asking for professional help, you know, it's that time where you have to understand how much you can take, and when things come a bit too loaded and too much, that's a sign that the system requires some kind of help. I also thought, you know, when families come to therapy, usually we try to reveal other stories that they went through in their life, you know, and now they have another story, surviving a pandemic. So let's use it. It's resourceful, you know, like we said, we don't focus only on the negative, we focus on the positive. So this is a resourceful story, and I'm sure this is going to come in handy, whether it's the second wave, we don't know whether it's coming or not, or whether possibly in the future, you know, we don't know what the future holds. So having the story as a resource that we went through some kind of forced, unpredicted change is helpful to remember. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that once, if you happen to go through a phase, you know, when there's a change and you tend to panic or to get anxious, you know, just to tell yourself that it's okay, because this is part and parcel with the process of change. So we normalize our anxieties, because that helps us to regulate our emotions. So it's okay not to not know what to do. It's okay we feel panic. It's okay for the time being there is chaos in our house. You know, slowly things will unfold, but it's okay to go through that process. Sometimes we want things perfect, but we can't help them, especially in times like this. The last thing I wanted to add is that I came across to these two authors who are writing, they're American authors actually, they're writing a book about good guys, how men can be better allies for women in the workplace, on Harvard's Business Review. And they give us hope, you know, that this pandemic demanded a shift in the traditional division of household responsibilities. And they believe that the presence of more men sharing more fully in domestic duties, because they interviewed husbands of women working in the healthcare. And it could, for an extended period of time, you know, there is potential to create a sea change in gender norms. So there is hope for us, for these kind of equal division of roles when it comes to work and when it comes to parenting.
Thank you to all of our speakers. So I'll start with the participants' questions. And one question is related to what Ruth just said. So I think I'll just move to this one first, so we can continue this conversation. And it's from Louise Thompson, who is based in Scotland, and she writes, "Mothers still spring to mind when it comes to considering the impact of COVID-19 lockdown and other consequences. But I think fathers are having to adjust to a lot, being at home all day and having to participate in the homeschooling and change to childcare. Question, are women reporting a sharing of the load, or is it becoming a source of confrontation within the home?
Okay, I think there are different scenarios. When you have families that have already existing resources, they've went through something similar to this, you know, unpredicted change, I think there will be a tendency for the woman, and if there is recognition that there is mutual respect within the system, I think the woman will possibly have more of a predisposition to open up. However, if the system never had any experience whatsoever in something like this, it could possibly be that it's too much of a risk zone, especially if there is a lot of chaos or insecurities, you know, going along. Possibly she wants to hold on to see how things are going, how things are developed, you know, making sure that everyone is displaced, and then later perhaps addresses this issue. You know, mothers tend to be a bit selfless, so they look after the others first and then they look after themselves. Having said that, there are systems where, for example, there are already existing marital conflicts, you know, and perhaps power imbalances as well between couples. Such a request can put the couple under strain. So it could be that no, in those scenarios, it's actually not being addressed, but rather taken out because she assumes that is the best way forward for the time being.
Thank you, Ruth. We have a question all the way from New Zealand, Jane Coughlin. And she writes, with other friends, we have been wondering how to support families to get enough food or know where to get help. We had such short notice, and our concern is for women and children on the breadline and for whom domestic violence is a problem. Would one of our speakers like to comment on this?
I can maybe
Francesca?
say something.
Yes.
It depends a little bit on countries, but I know that there is a little bit of a social movement growing everywhere. In my super tiny little town here in Switzerland, there is a spontaneous movement of people checking out on their neighbors, you know, elderly, if they need help with shopping, with food and stuff like that. So there's kind of some solidarity coming out spontaneously from people. In the US, where my mother-in-law and father-in-law live, I know that it's a big problem, for example, when children do not attend school, because some of them get the only meal at school. And so there are children that by not going at school, they go hungry. And I know that the government has put in place special programs in order to have the meals delivered to the home of these families, but it's definitely a big problem. We know, for example, with domestic violence in Italy, the call at the hotline went up 70% during the quarantine period. So it's definitely a big problem. There are ways to reach out even in these cases. Here in Switzerland, for example, women and also in Italy, shelters for women remained open. So women could actually go there with their children, even during the strict lockdown in Italy. There are codes that have been used, for example, in pharmacies in Italy too, where women that are experiencing violence at home can go, and by saying, you know, I need this type of mask, is a signal to the pharmacist that they need help. So there have been some measure, partially, you know, spontaneous from the population and partially put in place by the government to take care of these problems that I am sure they're greatly underestimated at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. Another important question from Anna De. What about single mothers and single parent households? Who would like to comment on this one?
Yeah. I think the pressures, you know, impinging on the system are higher here. So obviously it's going to be more demanding for these parents who are parenting the child on their own because they don't get a break. And don't forget that there are no extended family support systems. And for a while, there were no nursery or school available as well. So imagine that. For example, I know of stories from women who work full time, and they were given leave, paid leave by the government, or they're working strictly from home, which are seeing this period as a blessing, because like this, she can, attend to her daughter much more comfortably, because at least she's not running around outside the house, going from one room to the other. There's a little bit of flexibility, but it's definitely more demanding, I would say, I think across the board, when there are issues of concerns, that were existing before the pandemic, during the pandemic, they're going to be more pronounced. And I think this is one situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Amy Camille Rizara is also drawing our attention to another particular group who is at risk. And I will just read a brief introduction to Amy. She's an assistant lecturer at the University of Malta and is also a meningitis survivor and lives with a kidney transplant and is a mom to a 3-year-old. And her comment is that she agrees with the challenging scenario for families with preschool children, but would also like to shed light on the effects of the pandemic on disabled mothers and mothers who are immunocompromised. So she says this is a cause of the anxiety is much higher in this case since they are even more vulnerable.
Yes, and I think also there, Annemarie, that it's even if society opens more, if you are a mother in a group at risk, if two normal healthy parents have doubts on putting their kids back to school or back to daycare and how that will affect their life and so on, if you are a mother or a father in a group of risk, that how do you deal with that situation, and how can you return to work if you are not able to put your children back to school or in daycare? And so I mean, that is I think it's important to shed a light on that, and because that's adds an extra aspect and an extra challenge to the whole situation when you are at risk yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question now about children this time by one of our participants. How can we help children who lost enthusiasm for school and learning activities?
I can say something maybe here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So hopefully the schools are gonna reopen soon, or so some sort of social activities for the kids. In Italy, again, for example, the schools are apparently they're not gonna open until the next school year, but it's possible that some summer camps they're gonna be organized. It's important for everybody to remind ourselves that as we had to adapt to a new situation when the lockdown was put in place, we will have to adapt to a new situation when we start to go back into life. This is called the hut syndrome, and it happens to people. For example, it's typical in mothers after maternity leave when they have to go back to work. It's a period of, need to readapt, you need to change again, find a new balance. The dynamics within the family are changing again. And for kids, it's no different. They struggled to adapt to the new situation. They will struggle a little bit to go back. For example, this morning, my girl, she's 5, she went back to kindergarten. She was super excited, but at the same time, she was worried about it. And, she wasn't sure. It's a new situation, who's gonna be there. It's a different group. She doesn't fully understand. So it's important for the parents to listen to to find the time to listen to the concerns of their kids, to keep the conversation going, talk to them, tell them that, also for us, it's not easy. There are also adults that lose, you know, the interest in their job. They lose the sense of purpose and these kind of things. So it's important to, you know, take it slowly also. Yeah, keep the conversation going and take it step by step also when we're going to venture to this new normal outside our houses.
I was thinking the same. I was thinking the same thing as well. This is part of, you know, dealing with change and maintaining the change and taking cues from the environment in terms of how to adjust. This is another context, you know, adjusting to the idea that now we're halfway through the school year, yet it feels like it's day one. That's how I felt it this morning when I saw my daughter going to school, you know, with the anxiety, because like you said, it's a different group, you know, that she's with, and for a very limited time, and she didn't even have any exchange with her friends, because the time where she could see her friends is the time where actually they don't allow them to meet. So it's like going to school to have that interaction, but in reality, you know, it could be that it's not as they pictured it in their mind. So I would say, you know, coming back and monitoring and thinking about the good things happening, you know, and also about what they're not comfortable with. For example, they've had enough of hearing about measures, possibly, you know, I had to repeat again and again and again. I've heard it from other friends of mine. So it's not easy. It's a new scenario, and it will take us some time to find our you know, roots in it.
Thank you, Ruth. I have a question related to children before we move on to another subtopic. And this question is addressed to Else by Claudia Aurizicchio. Did you have any outbreaks reported in your country within childcare or schools? And are you testing your children?
As far as I know, we have not had any big outbreaks in schools or kindergartens since they opened. But as I said, it's been quite strict measures, and they have I know some cases where one of the workers have tested positive, and they have quarantined the children then for the next 14 days. We are testing children. About 5% of the positive cases in Norway are under 20 years of age, which is quite similar in Denmark and South Korea, and also in Iceland, which are all countries where there has been quite extensive testing.
Okay, thank you, Else. An interesting comment by another participant. And she or he writes, it's an anonymous comment, there appears to be a big conflict to me between mothers who can enjoy this time and their children, and those who have to juggle working from home and would like to enjoy it, but are suffering additional guilt of not doing either job well. Can you comment on this conflict?
Yes. I think I can comment, and Ruth, you can comment as well. I completely agree that this is probably a conflict for a lot of working mothers. When the pandemic was on the rise, and I was at the hospital a lot and had a lot of work to do with organizing our department, I felt a lot of this guilt, and I saw a lot of my friends, they were baking cakes and cookies every day, whereas I was either on the phone or in the hospital. And I absolutely felt this guilt, and very much felt that I was not able to do either. I was not able to be a good mother, and I was not able to be a good person at work. So absolutely, I think this is absolutely something a lot of working mothers have felt during this time.
Any other comments?
I think when you hear the word juggling, you know, that image of one plastic bottle in your hand and the other up in the air, no? So it's like you don't know exactly whether it's going to land in your hand or whether you're going to manage it, you know. And this is the reality, that you are juggling different roles, and it means that there will be days where you'll juggle it a bit better, and there will be days where you juggle it a bit less so, and it's okay. I think we have to remember, we have to do ourselves the favor of looking after ourselves and tell ourselves we are not human women, we are not women fathers, or mothers, we can give our best. And I think one way of children to learn about this kind of role, of being a mother and working at the same time is also by having us talking to them about how we juggle, I wanted to sit down with you. I had this idea of doing this with you, but something came along and I just couldn't, because this is what is required sometimes from me at work. How do you feel about this? And she said, mommy, I've had enough. Okay, how can we make it better that when this happens, at least you feel that I'm here with you. And I've heard of mothers, they're giving lessons and their child is sitting next to them on the floor. So we have to help them come to terms with this reality as well, because this is a learning experience of how, we are juggling different things. And again, normalize this idea that it's okay to make mistakes, and we cannot have it all. One day we'll have it better. It's already enough. That's what we can hope for.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes, sure.
I want to say, keeping using the metaphor of juggling, that this situation, unlike juggling where you practice and you practice and you practice and you become very good at it, is an impossible situation. There's no way that women can keep, working 100%, being the teacher of their kids at school, at home, taking care of the house, mothering, having fun times and all these kind of things. We don't have enough time because, we're home. We were struggling before, honestly, and now we have the same time to do 3 times the job. So this is actually not possible. So something has to go. We need to lower our expectation for how productive we're going to be at work, for how good for all the artworks we're going to do with our kids, or all the baking that we're going to do with our kids when they're home, because we cannot do that. And I want to say another thing. It's important that we change the narrative about mothers being at home and struggling to parents being at home and struggling, because fathers have a role too in this. If a mother and a dad, a mom and a dad work both 100%, who said that, the mom has to cook and the dad has to sit in the office with the door closed all day? This is something that we have to change from inside the household.
Thank you, Francesca. A very pertinent question by Lauren Shapiro. What would be your biggest single piece of advice for mothers who are panicking during this pandemic?
I think on a pure medical note, my biggest piece of advice for mothers who are panicking is the same I tell myself every day, is that children are not they get a mild disease. The majority of children are getting a mild disease. I worry when my son goes on his bike outside, but I should probably worry more about that than about him getting sick from corona. This is my personal advice based on the numbers that we know that children are getting a mild disease, and you have to be very unlucky if you have the child who gets very sick. But you can be that also when they go outside on their bike.
Thank you, Else. I have a question with regard to grandparents, which we haven't mentioned in the Q&A session yet. As a grandmother, I have to hear my grandson ask me questions like, do you want to come and see me, Nana, or do you still love me, when we video call each other? I worry about other preschoolers who may not be so supported in their households and the impact this lockdown is having on their well-being. Any comments from your side?
I think this relates to the loss of the social contact now with significant others. And I think it's very important us as adults to again tune in with our kids, parents tune in with their kids and talk about what they're going through. Like if a child comes to you and tell you, you know, I'm afraid that my grandma doesn't love me anymore, instead of saying, what are you saying? You know, this is ridiculous. Don't discard that feeling and that insecure, but rather take into account that, oh dear, this is a tough time, right? Because you cannot benefit from going to your grandparents and spend time there, or sleepovers there, but it will happen, you know. It's important that we keep ourselves safe for the time being, but rest assured that grandma and granddad, this is the Maltese butting in, grandma and granddad are missing you just as much, if not more, because they need your energy, your spirit, your laughter. I think it's very important to reassure, you know, and talk age appropriately as well, you know, because now we need to remain safe. You don't, if we're talking about a small child, we don't need to talk about, you know, because there is a risk of dying, you know, because it can provoke unnecessary anxiety in the child. So it's important just to acknowledge it and to frame it worded age appropriately.
Thank you, Ruth. Another question. I know we're running out of time, but this is also a very important question, which I think most parents are asking themselves. Do pre-existing conditions in children, for example, congenital heart defects or asthma, increase their risk significantly as they do in adults? Or are children overall more resilient or less affected by the most dire cases?
I will try to answer this, Annemarie. I think there are many things we don't know, and I would, in this case, in children with pre-existing conditions, I would discuss that with their doctors before going back to school, and so that you have a clear plan. So that would be my advice. I think there is this is a new disease that we will know a lot more about in a year's time, and we don't know too much about it now. So I would have a discussion with the doctors who know the disease of or the history of that particular child.
Thank you, Else. We have two more comments or questions which I would like to mention, since it's just two. So I think we can give these two comments some time. And one of them is from Emma Lane. And she asks, will this drive greater disparity between the sexes, setting gender equality back if there is no or limited shared responsibility within the home, and women will shoulder the greater burden, working or otherwise?
Well, that is a great question. And the short answer is yes. Honestly, that's you know, that it's kind of linked to what I was saying before, that it's important for what we can inside our house to fight that battle with our partners, to have that conversation with our partners. Sometimes, you know, it's easy, it's a natural thing because of the family dynamics. Other times, you know, you discover, you know, a side of your partner that maybe you didn't know it was there. But it's important to have a conversation about these things, because yes, okay, I can sacrifice my job now, but what after the pandemic? I mean, what if I'm not able to get another job because I gave up my job before to stay home with the children? So it's important that yes, we request to the government that they put measurements in place for women to be able to go back to work in a normal way. But it's also important that we fight our own battle inside our household in order to have a shared responsibility with our partners.
Ah, yes, now I know. Perhaps one learning takeaway for women is that instead, when they, you know, in situations like this, or perhaps other similar ones in the future, instead of assuming right away, you know, that this is something that they have to do, because the system gets used to it so much that it's like, oh, she will do it, you know, unconsciously there's this assumption, underlying assumption that she will take it up. You know, they stop and think for a while. How can I do it different in a way that I engage my partner in this, because we are the two we are two here. If we are talking of a family with two parents, right? So I think it's very important that we also stop and allow ourselves the awareness that we have a choice, because sometimes we think that we want it because we don't stop and think of whether this is the right thing for us or not. So just giving ourselves the choice of understanding whether we would like it to be like this or not. And this is also when it comes to non-earning women. So the staying home mom, that usually are all the time taking up this role. And we know what a burden it is when you're at home all the time looking after the kids one day after the other, and you don't have any projects on the side that gives you stimulation, just family. It is rewarding to be there for the family, but it's also important that if a person would like to have other things, that they allow themselves the possibility of having that option. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have one last question. I do not have children personally, but I was able to exchange with parents saying that they were impatiently awaiting the reopening of the schools, but who also felt guilty for wanting to get rid of, in inverted commas, of their children. How can we manage this feeling?
Oh, go ahead, Ruth.
No, you go, don't worry.
I wanted to say that this is something that happens a lot also with young moms and new moms, that, they love their children to death, but sometimes they're just too much. And it doesn't mean that you don't love them if you want some time for yourself, if you need time to work and focus on your work. And we should also remember that schools are not parking lots for kids. That's a place where they socialize, they learn, they grow. So wanting your kids to go back to school, it's not a thing that a bad parents would think in order to get rid of them. It's just, also a thing for their well-being. I mean, I'm sure that after 8 weeks, 9 weeks of lockdown with the parents, also the kids wants to go back to school, and maybe they want some time without their parents and getting rid of their parents, especially teenagers. So
I was going to say the same thing.
So it's important to understand that the fact that you need space as a person, it's human. And in the lockdown, if you have to work, to homeschool, to take care of yourself, to take care of the house, and all these other things, you have no personal space anymore. Just being in the same apartment, in the same house altogether, can be very stressful because, there's no more privacy, there's no more me time. If you need a break, especially if you have small kids, it's very difficult to get one. So it's important to be realistic about how this situation is stressful. How about the demands that we're getting from society are definitely not realistic. And also that, kids and parents, it's their destiny at one point to be divided and get rid of each other, even if they love each other and they keep loving themselves from a distance. But that's what it is. At one point, kids have to go, and that doesn't make you a bad parent. It just makes you a human being.
Well said.
Thank you. So with this statement and last question, I would like to bring this webinar to a close and also take the opportunity to give a special mention to mothers and single parents, since it was Mother's Day yesterday. Thank you, Constantina, for this beautiful photo. And thank you to all of you for this very interesting exchange. So we will continue the discussion with specific focus on children on Wednesday in our next webinar. And I would also like to mention our upcoming International Forum on Women's Brain and Mental Health, which will be held on the 19th and 20th of September. This forum is Women's Brain Project's flagship event, and this year's virtual edition will also include a panel on maternal mental health, and we are proud to have international experts participating in this panel. So please visit our website for more information about the forum. And before closing, we have one last poll for you. We would like to know, what other family-related topics would you like to see covered in a webinar? What would you like us to talk about and discuss about? So Francesca will start the poll. You can see it now. We have some ideas for future webinars. You can click or tick more than one. Feel free to tick all the topics that you would find interesting. And we'll do our best to work on these future projects or future webinars. We'll wait for a few moments more to give you some time to go through the options and click the choices you find interesting.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Almost the audience has voted.
Okay, I'm very curious to see what the verdict is.
Here you go.
There you go. Ooh, everything. Well, the most popular topic is COVID-19 and mental health. So we have 65%. And also a very interesting topic, fathers and new gender roles, as well as the impact of pandemic on kids. So we do have this webinar this Wednesday in 2 days' time. It is in Italian, but for those of you who can understand and follow Italian, please join this webinar, because we will be specifically focusing on this topic. And of course, the other topics are all worth talking about. Domestic abuse, we have 35% who tick that, and impact on caregivers, 39%. So yes, we have our work cut out for us. We will do our best to try and organize some more informative webinars about these topics. And now I will say once again a big thank you for joining us and contributing your remarks, comments, and questions. I wish you good night or good day, depending on where you are. And once again, thank you and keep safe.